The sun climbed slow and merciless over the plains, spilling gold across the sea of cattle gathered near the Cottonwood River. Dust rose with every restless hoof, hanging in the air like a warning. Laura Whitaker stood at the center of it all, her black riding coat already powdered brown, her spine straight, despite the ache that never quite left her chest. This was supposed to be Thomas's drive. 6 months ago, her husband had stood right where she stood now, mapping the route with a stick in the dirt, talking about river crossings and weather signs like he always did. 6 months ago, his laughter still lived in this land. Now, all Laura had left was the promise he never got to keep, to see their cattle safely, to market one last time. "I'll be leading the drive." The words fell into the morning, quiet like a dropped iron. Men paused midst the duel, hands froze on reins, and a few exchanged glances they thought she wouldn't notice. Kyle Mercer noticed everything. He leaned against a fence post, arms crossed, hat tilted low over sharp eyes that had seen too many bad decisions play out on open land. Trail boss, 38 years old. A reputation for bringing herds through hell and back with minimal loss and even fewer complaints. Thomas Whitaker had hired him personally for this drive back when Thomas was still breathing. Kyle pushed off the fence and walked toward Laura, boots crunching in the dirt. "Mrs. Whitaker," he said evenly, tipping his hat out of respect. "With all due respect, this isn't the place for a widow," Laura cut in, meeting his gaze without flinching. Her eyes were tired but steady, the kind that had learned how to hold pain without letting it spill. "I know what you're going to say, and the answer is no." Kyle exhaled through his nose. "I was going to say, this is dangerous. Long weeks on the trail, storms, rustlers, stampedes. It's not something you lead just to prove a point." Laura stepped closer, lowering her voice. "I'm not proving a point. I'm finishing what my husband started." A murmur rippled through the crew. Kyle studied her, then not as a woman standing in grief, but as someone standing her ground. He saw the calluses on her hands, the way she shifted her weight like someone used to a saddle. This wasn't a city widow playing rancher for pride's sake. Still, that didn't make it wise. "Thomas hired me to get these cattle to Abilene," Kyle said. "My responsibility is the herd and the men. I can't risk." "Then don't," Laura said, "because I'm not a risk. I grew up riding fence. I branded calves before I could read. I've run this ranch with Thomas for 10 years. The only thing I haven't done is lead a drive. And today, that changes." Kyle's jaw tightened. He glanced at the herd, then back at her. He heard Thomas's voice in his head. "She's stronger than she knows. Kyle, just don't let anyone tell her otherwise." "Damn it." "Fine," Kyle said at last. "You ride at the front, but you follow my calls on the trail. No arguments, no heroics." Laura nodded once, agreed. As the men mounted up and the herd began to move, Laura swung into her saddle. The familiar creak of leather steadied her. She looked ahead toward miles of open land, danger, and memory, and, for the first time since Thomas died, she felt something other than grief, purpose. Kyle rode up beside her, keeping a careful distance. "This trail doesn't care about promises," he said quietly. Laura's lips curved, just slightly. "Neither do I." The cattle began to roll forward like a living tide, dust rising to meet the sky. And as Laura Whitaker led her late husband's final drive into the unknown, Kyle Mercer realized this journey was going to change more than just the destination. By the third day on the trail, the land had stretched itself thin and unforgiving. Rolling plains gave way to scrub and shallow ravines, the sky a hard blue that offered no mercy. The cattle moved slow but steady, their lowing a constant hum beneath the creak of saddles and the jingle of tack. Laura rode at the front, just as she promised. She rose before dawn, checked the herd counts herself, and listened carefully when Kyle called adjustments to the pace or direction. She didn't argue, she didn't complain, and that, more than anything, unsettled him. Most folks who insisted on leading had something to prove. Laura rode like someone who already knew who she was. Kyle watched her from a distance, pretending to focus on the drag riders while keeping her in the corner of his eye. She handled her horse with quiet confidence, guiding him with small movements, reading the cattle's moods like a second language. When a steer broke from the edge of the herd that morning, Laura was already turning him back before Kyle could shout a warning that earned a few raised brows from the crew. By noon, the sun beat down hard enough to make tempers short. When they stopped near a dry creek bed, the men dismounted, grateful for even a hint of shade. Laura swung down from her saddle and knelt by the map spread across a rock, tracing the route ahead. Kyle approached, wiping sweat from his neck. "Storm's building west," he said. "Clouds are sitting wrong." Laura followed his gaze. Far off, the horizon darkened just enough to matter. "We push another hour," she said. "There's higher ground north of here. Thomas mentioned it once, said it saved him from a flood, back when he was driving alone." Kyle looked at her sharply. She nodded. "He told me everything." For a moment, Kyle saw the crack beneath her steady voice. Just a glimpse. Then it was gone. "We'll push," he agreed. "But if that storm turns mean, we camp fast." That evening, the wind came first, then thunder, rolling low and heavy across the plains. The cattle grew restless, hooves stamping, heads tossing. Laura felt the tension ripple through the herd like a held breath. "Easy now," she murmured, riding slow along the lead edge, her voice calm. She remembered Thomas doing the same, his hand raised, his tone steady. She swallowed hard and kept going. The storm hit, just as Kyle predicted, hard rain slashing sideways, lightning tearing the sky open. The men scrambled to form a loose circle, guiding the cattle inward, keeping them from bolting. Laura's horse shied at a thunderclap, and for a split second, fear flared. Kyle was there before she could blink, riding close, his presence solid as the ground beneath them. "Stay with me," he shouted over the rain. "Don't fight him, let him feel you're steady." She did, and slowly, the horse settled. They rode shoulder to shoulder through the worst of it, rain plastering Laura's hair to her face, mud soaking her coat. When the storm finally passed, leaving the land washed and quiet, the herd stood intact. No losses, no injuries. The crew let out relieved laughter. Someone clapped Kyle on the back. Another nodded, toward Laura, with new respect. Kyle dismounted and offered her his canteen. "You did good out there." She took a long drink, then met his eyes. "So did you." Silence stretched between them, not awkward, but heavy with things neither was ready to say. Kyle cleared his throat. "We'll camp here tonight." As the men settled in, Laura sat by the fire, staring into the flames. Kyle joined her a moment later, keeping a polite distance. "You don't ride like someone trying to honor a memory," he said quietly. "You ride like someone building something new." Laura didn't look at him. "Maybe it's both." The fire crackled, sparks lifting into the dark. And somewhere between the fading thunder and the open night sky, the space between Laura and Kyle felt just a little smaller. The morning air was crisp, carrying the smell of wet earth and hay. Laura adjusted her hat against the rising sun, scanning the herd as it grazed along the gentle slopes of Cedar Ridge. Kyle rode up beside her, the leather of his saddle creaking in a familiar rhythm. "You're keeping the herd tighter than usual today," Kyle said, nodding toward the cattle. "They're too calm for your liking." Laura gave a small smile. "Calm cattle are easier to lose if you don't pay attention. Thomas always said, a watchful eye keeps you safe from trouble, and a herd from scattering." Kyle studied her, noting the way her hand rested lightly on the reins, relaxed but ready. She didn't just know how to handle the cattle, she understood them. He'd seen many trail bosses with more experience crumble under the unpredictability of the open range. Laura wasn't one of them. By mid-morning, they crested a hill and spotted smoke curling over the distant horizon. Laura's heart tightened. Outlaws, ranchers, afire. The possibilities on the trail were endless, and often deadly. Kyle squinted. Looks like a small campfire. Might be harmless, but we can't take chances. Laura nodded. We approach carefully. If it's trouble, we handle it fast. Her voice was calm, but her pulse quickened. She'd ridden through danger before, yet something about facing the unknown without Thomas beside her made it sharper. They guided the herd down into a shallow valley, circling to keep them from wandering toward the smoke. Laura rode closer to Kyle. "What's your read?" she asked. Kyle shook his head. "I'm not sure yet. Could be hunters, could be lost travelers. We'll find out soon enough." They rode slowly, eyes scanning for movement. As they neared the smoke, a lone figure emerged, a young man, waving frantically. Laura relaxed slightly. "Looks like just a traveler," she said, though she kept her guard up. Kyle's hand hovered near his revolver, a silent warning to stay cautious. The traveler, a wiry man with sunburned cheeks, fell to his knees. "Thank God," he gasped. "I'm lost. My wagon broke down. I've been out here since yesterday." Laura dismounted, approaching him carefully. "You're safe now. We'll help get you back on the trail." Kyle watched, impressed. Laura didn't falter under pressure, didn't coddle or scold. She simply assessed the situation and acted. By the time the man's wagon was secured and he was safely guiding his mules again, Kyle realized how much he trusted her instincts. Not just because she was Thomas's widow, but because she deserved his respect. Later that afternoon, the herd reached a narrow canyon. Laura rode at the lead, her focus absolute. Kyle fell in step beside her. "This passage is tricky," he said. "Cattle get spooked here easily." Laura nodded, guiding the herd with small gestures and quiet commands. The first few cows hesitated at the edge of the rocks, but Laura's calm voice and steady hand coaxed them forward. Kyle couldn't help but admire her. He had seen plenty of riders struggle with a nervous herd in the tight confines of a canyon. But Laura moved like the land itself had taught her how. By the time they emerged from the other side, the sun was dipping low, painting the horizon with streaks of orange and purple. Kyle and Laura rode a few paces apart, their eyes meeting occasionally, sharing the silent acknowledgement of a day survived without loss. At camp that evening, Kyle approached Laura, holding 2 mugs of hot coffee, for the woman who saved half the herd and kept the rest calm. Laura took one, her fingers brushing his. "You make it sound like I did it alone." "Maybe," Kyle admitted, a small grin tugging at his lips. "But you've earned every ounce of respect this trail has to give." Laura met his gaze, a warmth blooming in the spaces between words. "Respect is earned," she said softly, "not given." Kyle nodded. "Then you've certainly earned mine." The campfire crackled as shadows danced across their faces. Somewhere between danger faced and victories shared, the lines of distance between them began to blur. Trust had grown where skepticism once stood, and for the first time, Kyle wondered if this journey was about more than just cattle. It might just be about them. The morning broke in a golden haze, the plains shimmering with dew that clung to the cattle's backs and the riders' boots. Laura stretched in the saddle, feeling the familiar tension in her shoulders ease ever so slightly. The herd was moving steadily, and for a moment, the trail seemed merciful. But the weather had its own plans. Kyle rode up, a grim set to his jaw. Storms coming from the west, fast. His eyes scanned the horizon, dark clouds rolling like waves over the plains. Laura adjusted her hat, squinting. "We'll make camp at the ridge before it hits. The cattle need higher ground." She shifted her weight, signaling the herd to follow. Kyle followed, keeping close but letting her take the lead. He trusted her decisions, nowned blindly, but with a respect that had grown over days of watching her ride, of seeing her act decisively under pressure. As the sky darkened, the wind picked up, whipping dust and hay through the air. Cattle lowed nervously, hooves digging into the earth. Laura's voice cut through the chaos, calm and steady. Easy now. Stay together. She moved along the line, coaxing stragglers back into formation, her hand firm but gentle. Kyle rode beside her, keeping one eye on the herd and one on her. Every command she gave was precise, every gesture intentional. He'd seen leaders before, but none with the quiet authority Laura possessed. And beneath it, he sensed a vulnerability she rarely let show, a deep ache for the husband she had lost, for the life that had once been hers. By mid-afternoon, the storm broke. Rain hammered down, lightning splitting the sky, thunder rolling across the plains. Laura's horse shied at a sudden clap, but she held him steady. Kyle was there instantly, guiding the horse with practiced ease. "I've got him," he shouted over the roar. "Focus on the herd." Together, they moved through the worst of it, corralling the cattle, shielding them from panic. By the time the storm passed, the herd was intact, though mud clung to everything, and the riders were soaked to the bone. They set up camp on higher ground, a thin line of smoke rising as they built a small fire. Laura sat on a log, her coat dripping, hair plastered to her face. Kyle joined her, handing over a tin cup of coffee. She accepted it silently, taking a long, grateful sip. "You rode well today," he said, quietly settling beside her. "Better than most men I've worked with." Laura gave a small, tired smile. "I've had practice, and I've had motivation." Kyle studied her motivation. "Thomas," she whispered, staring into the fire. "I promised him I'd finish this drive, that I'd see it through no matter what." Kyle nodded, understanding without needing more. He glanced at her, the firelight catching her face in a way that made his chest tighten. "I can't imagine how hard that's been," he said. "Riding every day, seeing the land you shared with him, carrying the weight of everything." Laura looked at him then, her eyes meeting his. For a heartbeat, the world shrank to just the two of them, the fire crackling between them. "It hasn't been easy," she admitted, "but it's mine to do, and I'm glad you're here, watching my back." Kyle's hand brushed against hers, a tentative contact that lingered longer than necessary. "Laura," he started, then paused. "I didn't expect this. I thought I'd just be the trail boss, keeping the cattle safe." But he swallowed, fighting an emotion he hadn't anticipated. "I've come to care about you, more than I should." Laura's breath caught. The honesty in his voice struck a chord she hadn't realized was waiting to be played. She reached out, taking his hand in hers, fingers intertwining. "Kyle, I feel the same. I've tried to ignore it, focus on the drive, but it's there." Thunder rumbled in the distance, but neither flinched. The storm outside seemed a mirror of the storm within them, wild, unpredictable, yet strangely cleansing. They sat in silence, hands entwined, watching the fire burn down to embers. Respect had blossomed into trust, and trust had quietly grown into something more. The trail had brought them together, and neither of them could deny it any longer. The night stretched on, stars peeking through the clouds, and for the first time in months, Laura allowed herself to hope not just for the drive, but for what might come after. The morning sun painted the horizon in shades of pink and gold, and for the first time in days, the plains felt peaceful. The herd moved steadily, calm after the storm, and Laura Whitaker rode at the front with a sense of quiet triumph. Kyle Mercer rode beside her, the air between them lighter than it had been in weeks. They had faced lightning and mud, lost cattle and fear, but somehow they had endured. And somewhere along the trail, the line between respect and something more had blurred into a promise neither had expected. "Almost to Abilene," Kyle said, his voice carrying a note of relief. "Just a few more miles, and this drive will be done." Laura nodded, scanning the herd one last time. "It's been a long journey, but we made it. Every step, every decision. It's all led to this." She glanced at him, her eyes softening. "Couldn't have done it without you, Kyle." He tipped his hat, a small teasing grin tugging at his lips. "Don't let it go to your head. You did most of the hard work. She laughed, a sound that felt like sunshine after a long storm. Maybe. But it feels good to have someone who actually believes in me. The final stretch of the drive was quiet, but charged with anticipation. Cattle lowed softly hooves, brushing the dusty ground, and the men rode with a mix of relief and pride. For once, Laura allowed herself a small moment of vulnerability, realizing that the fear that had shadowed her since Thomas's death had finally lifted. When the herd finally reached the market, men began unloading the cattle with practiced efficiency. Laura dismounted, feeling the ache of the trail in her bones, but also a fierce sense of accomplishment. Kyle followed, lifting his hat as he surveyed the scene. "You led them well," he said quietly, stepping closer. "Better than I ever expected." Laura smiled, the weight of the drive finally lifting from her shoulders. "Thank you, Kyle, for trusting me, and for keeping me sane along the way." He took her hand gently, fingers intertwining with hers. "I didn't just trust you because I had to. I trusted you because I saw how capable you are, and because I care about you more than I probably should." Her breath caught, and she met his gaze, feeling the warmth of the connection that had grown slowly, day by day, mile by mile. "I care about you too," she admitted, her voice steady despite the flutter in her chest. Kyle pulled her into a careful embrace, the noise of the market fading around them. "Guess we both found something worth holding on to out here," he murmured. Laura rested, her head against his shoulder, feeling the sun on her back and the security of someone who had become more than a trail boss. "Seems like it," she whispered. They stood together for a moment longer, watching the herd being settled, the men bustling around and the open sky stretching above them. The trail had been long and hard, but it had brought them to a place neither had anticipated: home, together, and ready for whatever came next. As the sun began to dip, casting a golden glow over the plains, Laura and Kyle shared a quiet smile, the kind that spoke of unspoken promises and the beginnings of something enduring. And as the market settled into the soft evening light, Laura laughed softly. "We did it. We finished the drive," Kyle chuckled, squeezing her hand. "And we found something along the way, too." The camera of the imagination zooms out over the plains, the herd grazing peacefully, the wind whispering through the grasses, carrying the promise of new beginnings. And for Laura and Kyle, this journey marked more than the end of a cattle drive, marked the start of a life together, forged in dust, danger, and undeniable connection. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more Western stories.